Construction of Fort Sumter began in 1827. It was named for Revolutionary War hero Thomas Sumter, and it was built on a sandbar that's at the entrance to the Charleston harbor. Now, the sandbar was not strong enough to hold a fort. It had to be built from rock. So large rocks were hauled by ships to Charleston harbor from the coast of Maine. As you can see here, the fort originally was set up as a 5-sided fort.
When you disembark, you use the handrails. Watch the step getting off. Just use that.
We have arrived. Just gotta wait for him to dock the thing so we can get off and explore. See if anything goes bump. So this is the location where it all started for the Civil War. And I was telling my folks earlier, I said it's just so cool when you go to these historic sites to think that, 50 years ago, there were men out here that were fighting for their lives, and the country was just about to be ripped apart by events that were going to happen here, and I'm actually going to be standing in that same space where those people were experiencing that. And just amazing that we've saved all of these sites for all these years for that kind of thing. It's very cool.
Even though the fort had been started in 1827, it still was not completely finished in 1860. Major Robert Anderson had a garrison of United States Army forces in Fort Moultrie in South Carolina here in Charleston, and he really felt like this was too big of a place for him to be able to defend. He didn't have enough men because they needed at least 300 to defend Fort Moultrie. So he decided that he wanted to move his force, which only counted about 127, over to Fort Sumter. So on Christmas night in 1860, Anderson got all of his men ready to evacuate to Fort Sumter. They loaded the men onto 2 schooners, and they brought all the ammunition and provisions that they had, and they transported themselves over to Fort Sumter, which wasn't very far away. The Confederacy was not happy about this. They felt like this was a break in their trust. On December 30th, the Charleston Courier printed an article condemning Anderson for having, quote, achieved the unenviable distinction of opening civil war between American citizens by an act of gross breach of faith. The New York Times picked that up and ran it on December 31st, the next day. A little while later, in April of 1861, Confederate Brigadier General P.G.T. Beauregard sent a notice to Major Anderson demanding the removal of U.S. forces from Fort Sumter. He wrote, I'm ordered by the government of the Confederate States to demand the evacuation of Fort Sumter. My aides, Colonel Chestnut and Captain Lee, are authorized to make such demand of you. All proper facilities will be afforded for the removal of yourself and command, together with company arms and property, and all private property, to any post in the United States which you may select. The flag, which you have upheld so long and with so much fortitude, under the most trying circumstances, may be saluted by you on taking it down. Colonel Chestnut and Captain Lee will, for a reasonable time, await your answer. I'm very respectfully your obedient servant, G.T. Beauregard. Well, Major Anderson read this and he refused. He wasn't going to go anywhere. He said, General, I have the honor to acknowledge the receipt of your communication demanding the evacuation of this fort, and to say in reply thereto that it is a demand with which I regret that my sense of honor and of my obligations to my government prevent my compliance. Thank you for the fair, manly, and courteous terms proposed, and for the high compliment paid me. So basically he said, hey, thanks for being nice about it, but screw you. That's the way I take it. I'm not leaving. General Beauregard sent word to Major Anderson on April 12th, the next day, that the Confederacy was going to open fire on Fort Sumter. He sent this at 3:20 a.m., and he gave him an hour. Then General Beauregard ordered his forces to fire on Fort Sumter at 4:30 a.m., and the first shots of the war between the states began at that time. Beauregard's forces pummeled Fort Sumter. It became quite an attraction for Charlestonians to watch. They all went out on their patios and lined along the streets and watched it as if it was fireworks going off, sipping their tea and cocktails, hooting and hollering and cheering. I think none of these people had any idea just how long and deadly the Civil War was going to be. Anderson's forces were outgunned, but they did return fire.
kind of hard to read because it's on white. It says, in reverential memory of the Confederate garrison of Fort Sumter, who during 4 years of continuous siege and constant assaults from April 1861 to February 1865 defended this harbor without knowing defeat or sustaining surrender.
So for 34 hours, this battle went on. There was constant shelling on the fort, and Anderson's forces managed to hold it. And the only thing that died during all of this fighting was a Confederate horse. Beauregard asked Anderson to surrender, and I guess he was done being pummeled because he agreed to leave. General Beauregard was very nice about it. He said, the terms I offered you earlier still hold. You can bring down the flag. You can salute it. We'll let you go peacefully. Now, not only was the first military shot of the war between the states fired here in Charleston Harbor, but enlisted rates for South Carolina were very high. About 60,000 South Carolina men fought in the war, and that was about the full number of eligible fighting males in the state. South Carolina also lost a greater percentage of its male population in the war than any other state. Death tolls show that between 18,600 and 21,000 men died. So South Carolina lost over 30% of its men between the ages of 18 and 45 in the 4 years of fighting.
Is there anybody in here?
Can you imagine bringing boatloads of granite from your neck of the woods down here to make an island, South Carolina? Because that's exactly what happened. They brought tons and tons of granite to make this island. They only worked during low tide because the sandbar was
So they built this island on a sandbar out of granite.
the outside. And once the island was constructed, they started building the fort. These bricks you see here are very special to us because these were made on local plantations by slaves.
These bricks were made by slaves. Wow.
And if you're thinking about this as well, this fort's being built to help defend the freedoms of the people in Charleston. If the people who were helping to make this fort were not going to be offered the same freedom. It's a crazy thing to think about. But by the time the Civil War began, our fort was still not done being constructed. States seceded from the United States. And at the time of their secession, there was one troop still stationed down here in Charleston.
I don't know if you guys can see, but there's this track here, which I imagine was what they would run the cannons on, back and forth. And then they would probably shoot out these holes that are bricked in now. It's all along here. And another one here. A lot of cannons out here. Anybody in here? Yeah, there are a ton of cannons out here. Just one right after the other. You can see why it was so good at defending. This fort wall in the front here is called the right face. It sustained the least damage of any of Fort Sumter's walls during the Union bombardment of 1863 to 1865. There's actually 11, and these are called Parrott guns. Now, Hey, you can adopt a cannon. I'm only adopting one if I get to fire it.
Private Daniel Ho was born in Ireland, and he immigrated to the United States in the 1840s. He was not a part of the militia. He was just a regular. He had enlisted in 1859 and then re-enlisted in 1861. He was assigned to Battery E of the 1st United States Artillery Regiment, and he was stationed at Fort Sumter. He was assigned to gun number 47. This gun was going to be used to salute Anderson as he was surrendering. They were going to do a 100-gun salute. Now, nobody knows for sure if it was a hot ember that ignited a pile of cartridges or if a gun prematurely sparked, but Private Ho tamped down the gun. It exploded, killed him almost instantly, mortally wounded Edward Galloway, who was nearby, and injured 4 other soldiers. Anderson's salute was cut short to 50 guns because of this, and Private Ho was buried on the parade grounds. His remains were relocated sometime later to Magnolia Cemetery, although there are some who claim that his body was sent to New York. The reason why I'm talking about this Private Ho and what happened to him is not just because he died and was buried on the parade grounds, but it was something that happened with the American flag that was flying above Fort Sumter. Today, when you go into the museum at Fort Sumter, you can see this flag that flew, and you'll notice that there's something very interesting about it. There's a face in the flag. Many people compare this flag to the Shroud of Turin in that it has what looks like the impression of a face on it, and it is believed that it is Private Ho's face. So you can look here for yourself. Does that really look like a face to you? And of course, it's very interesting if it is Private Ho's face because he basically would have been the first man killed in the official Civil War. Now, this face in the flag is not the only thing that's kind of creepy or could be a haunting remnant from the war that we have going on here at Fort Sumter. There are many people who claim to smell gunpowder while they're at the fort. And this isn't while there's any kind of demonstrations going on. There's no cannons that actually function there anymore. It's got a ton of cannons. They don't function anymore. So what is causing the gunpowder? Now, Private Ho might be doing more haunting activity than just having his face appear here on the flag. There are people who report seeing the ghost of a Union soldier at the fort, and some wonder if it isn't Private Ho since he had been buried on the parade grounds and had died there. Other people report seeing smoke at the fort, as if a cannon or guns are being fired. The fort is really amazing to see. I encourage anybody going to Charleston to take the ferry boat on out there and get a chance to see the fort for yourself. It's a very important piece of our American history. Plus, you get to see lots of dolphins on the way there. And maybe, just maybe, you might see Private Ho walking around in his ghostly form. Does he actually haunt Fort Sumter? Is that his face in the flag? That is for you to decide.
It's supposed to be some kind of a lookout.
Is this a watchtower? What's a watchtower?
Love kids. It's a watchtower. Alright, so that is a taste of Fort Sumter for all you guys. I hope you enjoyed that.